that good news side, the financial flexibility means that now if you have alternative funding sources, such as a special assessment you've passed or a bank loan or a line of credit your association has obtained, you can design your reserve plan around that. Go ahead and flip the hourglass upside down on those things. We're now going to take care of those with this cash we have. So now going into our reserve plan, we can take into account the fact that it now has a full life expectancy ahead of it.
HOA Insights is brought to you by 5 companies that care about board members: Association Insights and Marketplace, Association Reserves, Community Financials, HOA Invest, and Kevin Davis Insurance Services. You'll find links to their websites and social media in the show notes.
Welcome back to HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. I'm Robert Nordlund, and I'm here today for episode number 118 with the president of our Florida Regional Association Reserves Office, Will Simons, RS. Now, RS stands for Reserve Specialist. Now, so many listener questions have to do with Florida legislation, even though we're over 4 years after the tragic Champlain Towers South collapse, so there's still a lot going on. The state of Florida continues to balance the tightening of standards related to condo safety and not upsetting the balance of owner freedoms, owner reactions, board responsibilities, and real estate values. So with a significant new set of revised laws that went into effect July 1 here of 2025, we felt it was a good opportunity to get someone on the show who is on the ground and well-versed in this new law and Florida legislation in general. Well, last week's episode 117 was another one of our popular board hero conversations, this time with a board member from the Florida Keys by the name of Lynn Ochberg. And we titled the episode Experience Counts, and you'll realize that after just a few minutes of listening to her story of being a board member at her association. She's a delightful lady, and when I finished recording that episode, my thoughts afterwards were, wow, next time in Southern California, I need to look her up and make plans to visit. I know there are many of you listening that are just like Lynn, selflessly and effectively caring for your association. And we want to say thank you and celebrate the hard work you do for your association. So if you missed that episode or any other prior episodes, take a moment after today's program to listen from our podcast website, hoainsights.org, or watch on our YouTube channel. But better yet, subscribe from any of the major podcast platforms so you don't miss any future episodes. Well, those of you watching on YouTube can see one of my favorite mugs here. It's a HOA Insights mug. A couple of board members talking in front of their deteriorated association, trying to figure out if that's really what they want to do with low assessments. Anyway, I got that mug from our merch store, which you can browse through from our hoainsights.org website or the link in the show notes. You'll find we have some great free stuff there, like board member Zoom backgrounds, and some specialty items for sale, like the mug. So go to the merch store, download a free Zoom background, take a moment, look around, and find the mug you'd like, and email me at podcast@reservestudy.com with your name, shipping address, mug choice, mentioning episode 118 mug giveaway. And if you're the 10th person to email me, I'll ship that mug to you free of charge. Well, we enjoy hearing from you, responding to the issues you're facing at your association. So if you have a hot topic, a crazy story, or a question you'd like us to address, you can contact us at the same email address, podcast@reservestudy.com, or call us at 805-203-3130. This episode is on me. As I said a moment ago, I wanted to share some news from Florida about this new mid-year legislation, what it's about, why it was written, and what it does. So, Will, welcome to the program.
Robert, hey, hello from Florida. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Okay, what's this new bill called, and why did it start here July 1?
Yeah, well, this most recent piece of legislation is House Bill 913. This is the culmination of a process that really began, I want to say, last summer, maybe last fall. Prior to this one, we had a couple other pieces of legislation in Florida that addressed the need for reform for structural integrity reserve studies, from Milestone inspections, a bunch of other kind of overdue changes to Florida law that were, unfortunately brought about by the Champlain Towers South tragedy. So this really has been something that's been beginning in workshops last fall and then made it through this year's legislative cycle in Florida, and was just passed by the legislature maybe a month, 6 weeks ago, something like that. And then it was signed into law maybe a week or two ago, and it took effect July 1st. So I should say, I guess it probably was signed late June, but took effect July 1st. So this is now the new law of the land here in Florida.
Excellent. And that's a clarification that I want to make sure everyone hears. It's Florida law. It's not national law. So the kind of things we're talking about today have to do with Florida and specifically their legislative response to Champlain Tower South. Champlain Tower South collapse was 2021.
Yep.
So they started some condo safety legislation. Wasn't the first one in 2022?
Yeah, that was Senate Bill 4D was the first official piece of legislation that came out in summer of 2022. And then that was followed in 23 by Senate Bill 154. And then in 2024, we had another House bill, which wasn't exactly meant to change very much with the CIRMS requirements. And just for those listening, I'm going to say CIRS as an abbreviation. That's SIRS, that's Structural Integrity Reserve Study. So this is the fourth year in a row, really, that we've got new legislation. And I really see that as an ongoing effort and a challenge for the Florida lawmakers to respond to this. It's obviously a very, very complicated issue, or really combination of issues. And I've really been impressed with how diligent the people involved have been to try to get this right. So the most recent addition or changes to the law, and there could be more coming next year, but for right now, this is the latest.
Got it. Now, tell me about, you said the CIRS, the Structural Integrity Reserve Study. How is that different from what people across the country might think of as a reserve study?
Yeah, what I've been trying to emphasize to people is that it is still a reserve study. It's still based on a physical analysis and a financial analysis for a property. What's different about a CIRS from a conventional reserve study is that in Florida, we now kind of separate out a subset of components which are now considered, structural. And those are mandatory to be funded in a different way from non-structural components. So on the structural side of things, we're looking specifically at the roof, painting and waterproofing, the structure of a building, windows and doors, plumbing, electrical, fire protection, and any other, big ticket item that would otherwise possibly compromise or affect one of those things on the list. So that's what you'll find in a CIRS. Now, as we know, condos and co-ops and other properties consist of much more than that. You've got interior common areas, lobbies, hallways, swimming pools, elevators, air conditioning systems, tons and tons of other stuff, which are all traditional reserve components, but have not specifically been selected for that structural integrity designation. So these days, what we do for our clients and what other providers are doing for their clients typically is two reports. We will have the CIRS and then a non-CIRS or a non-structural reserve study. Both of them really, though, follow a lot of the same principles, the same methodology. The backbone of any good reserve study starts with the component list, with having an accurate understanding of what is there, what is its life expectancy, what is its replacement cost, and then translating that into an actionable funding plan so that the client has enough money when they need it and they don't get caught by surprise and need to rely on any outside sources of funds. That is true and consistent with any reserve study that's ever been done. The only difference now is the CIRS focuses a little bit more narrowly on those things.
So you said a couple of things there. The mandatory side, the CIRS side, is a list of specific components or projects at a property. And then there's the non-mandatory, all the, I want to say, normal stuff that happens at a community association. So what you have is kind of part A and part B, two parts that together help a board member, and we're talking to board members here, understand what their total obligations are.
Yeah, that's very important, I think, for people to understand that to appreciate the total financial picture for an association, you really have to have both. We've talked to some buildings in the last couple of years who just wanted to do the structural side only, and some others who said, we've got a CIRS, now we just want to do the non-structural side. I really would try to avoid that. I would try to keep your reserve planning kind of in a comprehensive, coordinated fashion so that whenever somebody's looking at the reserve budget, they're seeing the totality of the property, because it's very easy to get caught by surprise. One of the things I mentioned there was elevators. particularly with high-rise buildings, elevators are one of the most expensive things that you'll need to budget for, but they're not considered structural components under that law. So, we really just want to emphasize to people that you can't, close one eye and expect to see the whole thing, right? You have to have the both studies together representing the entire property.
Yeah, I imagine if you're in what was it, 13 stories for Champlain Tower South?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, 2 of the 3 elevators aren't working and the third one is unreliable. Your life's really going to change if you're on the 11th or 12th or 13th floor.
Yeah, no doubt about it, especially in Florida, where we have a lot of retirees and folks that would not look too kindly at taking the stairs on a hot day for 10 or 12 stories. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, I also want to explore a little bit about the mandatory and non-mandatory. That's an issue in Florida because almost can we say for decades, haven't the owners there had a line item veto for reserve funding?
Yeah. If we had the magic wand that we would like to have, I would turn back time and change this, decades ago, and it would have done a lot of people a lot of good. But yeah, for a long time, association residents, not the board of directors, but the residents of a property, have the final say so on whether or not they would include reserve funding in their annual budget. So what would happen traditionally or typically is the board is charged with preparing the annual budget. They have to put together a budget that includes adequate reserve funding for their components. But then there would be a step where the membership could vote to waive those reserve funds or not put the money away or to partially fund them. So we have a lot of properties in Florida that historically did little to nothing when it came to reserve funding, and they were illegally allowed to do that.
Wait. I want to make sure you say that clearly. They were legally allowed to do that.
Correct. Yes, they were within their rights to do that. They provided that they went through the motions, right? They would have to get an adequate vote taken, but if that took place, they would be able to enjoy an annual budget that did not have any reserve money in it. Now, if you look at that from the perspective of a brand new building, right, where their reserve obligations feel very far off, you can kind of understand the mentality, right? The board might say, okay, here's plan A. We have to show you this number that's got reserve money in it, and it's going to cost you, $400 a month. Well, here's plan B. If we take out all the reserve money, it's $200 or $250 a month. Which would you guys like? And if you're sitting here in a brand new building, it's very easy to not care or to turn a blind eye to those things that are, going to be somebody else's problem way down the road. Fast forward over time, if every generation of owners who comes and goes through that building has that same mentality, nobody's picking up the tab, right? It just gets shifted and shifted and shifted until those projects start to come due. Now you're looking at a roof replacement or a big painting project or whatever it may be that you have not been saving for over all this time. And so traditionally that would be a special assessment or a bank loan to pay for that. And people kind of shrug and move on and say, okay, next time that happens, it'll be somebody else's issue. Well, this has gone on in Florida for a long, long time. And it's very unfortunate because now we've got a lot of aging properties where the rate of saving has not kept up with the rate of deterioration of their components, and they're finding themselves in a tough spot.
Yeah, I think it was Warren Buffett said regarding investors, when the tide goes out, you find out who isn't wearing a bathing suit. And I think this is one of those situations where people are looking around in Florida and saying, oh, yikes, we've been with your hypothetical, we've been at $250 a month and we should have been at $400 a month. That's $150
and now
a month.
It's going to be $700 a month, and because we're making up for lost time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a hard thing. And so that's why if you're in the 49 other states and you're hearing about the condo crisis in Florida, we're talking about a lot of associations that have been, kind of from my California point of view, the owners have been going to Disney World instead of setting aside funds towards reserves. Again, from an outside point of view, it feels kind of crazy because Mother Nature and Father Time don't care what the reserve requirements are. They're gonna do what they do, and that's wear down a building. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's catch-up time.
It's definitely unfortunate, and I think part of it is just kind of maybe a little bit of complacency, but again, these people were not breaking the law. This was an allowable option, and it was the norm in a lot of places. And so, for a long time, I've always kind of felt that, historically, associations that did do a good job of funding the reserves, right, that they were being responsible, putting away that money, kind of took a hit in the marketplace, in the sense that if I'm a condo buyer and I'm looking at two buildings and one has a healthy reserve fund and is budgeting properly, but the dues are higher there,
$500 a month.
Yeah, compared to the other building across the street where, little to no reserves, not as much in the budget, but their annual, assessment or their monthly assessment is lower. To the uninformed buyer, that second building might look a little bit more attractive. Hey, the dues
Right.
are less over here. Otherwise, these buildings look and feel about the same to me. Not really digging into the financial statements. My realtor said this building's great. Well, what do I know the difference?
Yep.
So if you were in that first building, right, you're almost kind of getting penalized in the market a little bit by your property value may be suffering because you're not as attractive to that pool of buyers. So what I think is happening now with this new law, and that, the last couple of years have resulted in, is kind of a leveling of the playing field. I think now that everybody's going to be, mandated to fund their reserves properly, that's going to balance things out. Now, it might take a little bit of time. It might take a little bit of friction and frustration, but this is a good thing for the state of Florida. Ultimately, people are going to be paying the appropriate amounts, right? Paying the true cost of ownership to live in these buildings, which historically, I don't think they were quite doing that.
Yeah. And you said a phrase there, mandated to fund the reserves properly. Still in Florida, they're only mandated to fund a few of their components. They can still waive funding for, as you said, the air conditioner, the elevator, the carpeting, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that is true. Right. So that in this last couple of years of legislation, they did improve that. It is now more difficult to waive funding for those non-structural components. Now requires basically a simple majority, a 51% vote of the owners to do that.
Okay.
Whereas in prior years, typically it was a majority of a quorum of owners. So if you had 100 units in a building and a quorum was, 35 owners, well, you would only need a majority of 35. So you could have 18 people who decide the fate for all 100 people because they're the ones who showed up and were vocal at the meeting. Now it's 51 out of 100 owners would have to show up to make that vote. So that's a step in the right direction too. I mean, obviously we don't think there's ever a good reason to waive reserve funding. That doesn't make the problem go away. You're just going to have to pay for it in another fashion some other time. But that's a half step in the right direction.
Yeah, I realize I'm wringing my hands here just thinking about that kind of stuff. So the people watching on YouTube can see what I'm thinking about this. But yeah, it's a good challenge for people across state lines in Georgia or up the coast in Virginia or anywhere else. They're saying like, wait a minute, they're only paying part of what they should have been paying. So yeah, there's going to be a rebalancing. But are you beginning to see at all or get a sense that the new condo buyers are looking for the reported reserve fund strength to find out if they're buying into a strong association or a weak association? Has that started to happen yet?
Yeah, I think so. Anecdotally, I hear about that. We get calls from people who are in the process of trying to buy a condo, and whether it's them or their lender that's requiring it, there is more of a focus and intention on this. Spoke at a panel discussion earlier this year for the Miami chapter of the National Association of Realtors.
Okay.
A whole room full of realtors who are all asking very intelligent questions about condo reserves and budgets and fund amounts and requirements that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't know that would have been a topic of discussion or if it would have been an afterthought. So yeah, I think that the whole market is taking these things more seriously now, as they should.
Yeah, well, that's a good thought. That's a sobering thought. And I have a number of additional questions I want to find out, and I'm sure our audience does too, but it's time to take a quick break to hear from one of our generous sponsors, after which we'll be back with more Common Sense for Common Areas and news about Florida legislation.
Are you part of a homeowners association or condominium board? Making the right financial decisions for your community's future is crucial. At Association Reserves, we're proud to serve communities nationwide, specializing in reserve studies tailored to your community's unique needs. Our expert team helps you accurately assess your property's assets, forecast future expenses, and develop a solid funding plan. Whether you're a small HOA or a large condominium association, we've got you covered. Visit reservestudy.com to learn more and get a proposal for your association.
And we're back. Well, during the break, Will and I were speaking about the legislation itself and realizing that we owe you an explanation about what this legislation actually says and does. So, Will, take us down the path of some of the key points or the highlights of this new legislation that went into effect July 1, 2025 in Florida.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to it. I believe the final bill text is 190 something pages. So
yikes.
I won't pretend to cover it in any great detail. I mean, there's stuff that touches on milestone inspection requirements, responsibilities for developers, board member obligations, things like that. So I'll try to focus on some of the really important stuff. This is not a tear down and rebuild of any prior legislation. It's a fine tuning of it. The list of components required in a CIRMS did not change except for one small but important detail. The dollar threshold for what constitutes a kind of significant dollar amount has been raised from $10,000 to $25,000. So I think that was fine. That's good. The $10,000 number had been in place for decades and hadn't been updated in quite a long time. So effectively, what that means is, well, traditionally condos had to fund reserves for roofing, painting, and pavement resurfacing, and anything over $10,000. So now all condos in the state, not just those subject to the CIRMS requirements, can actually enjoy that increase.
Aren't there some significant projects that are still $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 that they arguably should fund through reserves?
Absolutely. Just because the law gives you that option doesn't mean you should take it, right? If you're in a 12-unit building, that $25,000 cost is more than $2,000 per owner, right? So you don't want to get caught by surprise for that. So just because, the law gives that option, I think each building needs to look at what is a significant threshold for them and then plan accordingly. So, procedurally, how to do a CIRMS didn't really change in this. One of the very important things was the deadline has shifted. So initially, the requirement to get your CIRMS done was December 31st, 2024. Very few, relatively speaking, associations met that deadline. So that's been extended to December 31st, 2025. So about another 6 months from now.
Why do you think so many associations were slow to get started on planning for, I want to say, inevitable deterioration, finding out where they stand?
I think it's a combination of things. I think there was just some initial sluggishness because the laws were changing every year. I think if you go back to 2022 and you look at what the requirement was, that changed pretty dramatically from 22 to 23. Another major change that happened in 2023 was they expanded the pool of providers who could actually do the CIRMS. Okay. Initially, you had to be a licensed architect or engineer, and traditionally those people don't do reserve studies, or at least not kind of a primary line of business. So when they allowed companies like ours to really, do the entire process, that really expanded the pool of providers. But that was effectively summer of 2023. So that was only 18 months of time to enjoy that extra capacity. One result of that too was that every reserve study provider in the state got very busy very quickly, and so there were stretches of time where it was hard to even get a proposal from somebody. So I don't think that there was complete apathy on the part of a lot of associations. They just couldn't get a good quality provider that they trusted in enough time.
Because companies like you were just plain busy and hiring and training as hard as you could.
Yeah, exactly. I think there was also somewhat of a question mark around enforcement, right? There was not any real clear answer to, what happens if you don't get it done by that deadline. There was a lot of associations that I think were maybe just kind of sitting on the sideline waiting to see what would happen. That is another new aspect of this year's bill that is significant. So the DBPR, the Florida,
which is
Department of Business and Professional Regulation.
So much of this just rolls off your tongue.
Sure. I'm glad it sounds like that to you. It feels like a mouthful, but they are the kind of enforcement body in the state that oversees condominiums and co-ops. And they have been granted additional powers under this bill to issue civil fines to associations who do not meet the deadline, possibly also to remove board members from their positions. So I know our audience has got a lot of board members in it. If you care about that position in your community and you have not done your CIRMS or won't have it done by the end of this year, you are at risk from being removed from that position. The DBPR has taken this pretty seriously. They've also been granted some additional budget, some additional staff this year to expand their enforcement capabilities. I know it's a big issue. And so this year, the Florida legislature really focused on that kind of in two ways, right? They said, we want you to be more responsible. We're going to enforce this, but we're also going to give more flexibility to associations. So that's kind of the good news, bad news. That good news side, the financial flexibility means that now if you have alternative funding sources, such as a special assessment you've passed or a bank loan or a line of credit your association has obtained, you can design your reserve plan around that. Okay. So if you have an association that was looking at $1 million project, you got your CIRMS done last year and you just couldn't fund that money very quickly. You had to do a special assessment or borrow it. That's okay. You can now go back to your CIRMS provider and update that study saying, hey, we now have this cash that's readily available to our board to spend on these projects. Go ahead and flip the hourglass upside down on those things. We're now going to take care of those with this cash we have. So now going into our reserve plan, we can take into account the fact that it now has a full life expectancy ahead of it.
Good. And that'll change their funding requirements significantly.
Oh yeah, it should decrease them, right? So
Yeah.
if you're in one of these associations that, went through the process in the last year, 2-3 years, and has now obtained this money that you didn't have before, it's time to update your CIRMS to take that into account. And in fact, you actually have to. So the part of the new law says that before you adopt any new annual budget, if the funding of reserves does not align with your most recent CIRMS, you must obtain an updated one. Good news is that does not mean you have to start from scratch. Okay. You probably don't have to have another inspection done. This may just be a quick, we call it a no site visit update, where it's just correspondence with the provider telling them, hey, here's our new projects. Here's our new account balance. Generate a new financial analysis for us based on that. It's going to be much quicker turnaround, much lower cost than what you paid for your comprehensive CIRMS that you've already done.
Well, it seems like there's also this momentum factor that there was a lot of associations that were really liking living in their maybe sheltered little reality of not funding for ongoing deterioration. And maybe they just were holding out hope that it wasn't true. And with all the changes in legislation,
right,
maybe it was going to change back.
Yeah, I mean, it has been, a tough time for associations in Florida the last several years. We've had several major hurricanes. The insurance premiums have gone up dramatically for a lot of properties. They are hurting financially in a couple of different ways. And these new reserve requirements for a lot of people have felt like somewhat of a punishment, or this, kicking them when they're down. And it really is not that. I mean, the data that we've seen from the, about 1,000 CIRMS that we've prepared is that the net average increase to the owners is, $100, $200 a month for most properties. This is not, completely, budget destruction.
It's not
type
night
money.
and day. Yeah.
No, it shouldn't be, right? So it's uncomfortable. It might be difficult for some people. I don't want to, say that there's not outlier buildings where they really are in a lot of trouble. But I would argue that would have been the case either way. In a world where the tower never collapses and these new funding requirements were never put in place, these buildings still would have had all the same projects that they now need to do. And they would have been in difficult financial circumstances either way. So I think what this has done is just illuminated a problem that was manifesting for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking back, didn't Champlain Towers South, I'm thinking rough numbers here, weren't they about to launch a $8 million special assessment or rehabilitation project divided by 135 units, something like that?
It was something like that. Yeah. The dollar amount might have even been more. I know it crept up a little bit by the time of the tower collapse. It was, certainly millions of dollars. I know they were about to begin work or had begun work on a roof project. So, that's just part of the sadness of that story, is that they were trying to turn things around. They had obtained some money. They were, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and just, sadly ran out of time. And it's just a terrible wake-up call, but that was the financial reality. They were about a 40-year-old property that traditionally had not put enough money away and found themselves facing a bunch of big, expensive projects that were all kind of hitting at the same time. And
my thinking is, if that's the way Champlain Tower South was, there's got to be tens, if not hundreds of other ones that are right up to that. And like you said, outlier properties, not necessarily all, but there's a lot of properties that got way behind with a lot of catch-up projects to do, and it is going to be expensive for a number of associations, at least for a while. Hey, you also mentioned the word a milestone inspection. Can you tell people what you're talking about there?
Yeah, so a milestone inspection is not required for all condo and co-op properties. It's only for older properties. So typically the first one would be due at 30 years. That's kind of the state requirement, unless there is a local requirement that requires it sooner. If their city or county may have a different timeline that's more restrictive, they'd have to abide by that. But typically it's first one would be due at the 30-year, mark of the building's CO date, and then every 10 years thereafter. And a milestone inspection must be done by an architect or an engineer, and it is more narrowly focused. It's specifically an inspection of the structure of the building. It starts with what's called a phase 1 inspection, which is just a visual inspection. If the inspector sees no signs of significant deterioration or nothing that is alarming, that's basically it. They pass, and if there's any repairs required, they would have to do those, and then they're good. Kind of get a 10-year bill of health there. If there is any substantial deterioration, it goes to a phase 2, which is much more intense. That's going beyond a visual inspection, using diagnostic methods, maybe tapping into concrete, really kind of going beneath the surface to see what's wrong, and then correcting it from there. So if a property has had that done within the last couple of years, that's part of this new House Bill 913, is they can also now pause their reserve funding contributions while they sort out the results of that milestone inspection. So if they had some immediate need for a major, structural repairs or waterproofing,
balconies here or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. The state wants them to focus on correcting those issues first, and then resume your reserve funding, as soon as you're able. But that's another example of kind of the financial flexibility that was built into this one.
I like that. And gets back to that starting point, is that it's all about safety.
Right.
Well, Will, we could speak more and more about this, but it's been great talking with you and the time we have today for the show and having you on the program. Any closing thoughts to add at this time?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. I mean, there's going to be a lot more coverage of this bill. There already are quite a few webinars and bulletins. There's law firms that are providing their kind of cheat sheet summaries of it. So for people who want to learn more, we're going to be doing a webinar on July 15th, where I'll speak for probably about an hour on this topic. I'm taking questions from the audience. So by the time you hear this podcast, they may have already been completed, but we'll definitely record that and make that available. So yeah, I don't have anything else to add other than thanks to all who joined us today, and we hope you got some good information from this.
Fantastic. Well, if you'd like to get in touch with Will or our Florida regional office, you can learn more about their office and their staff at reservestudy.com. And just want to let you know, we'll have a direct link in the show notes to that. And to clarify, Will, your team prepares reserve studies all across Florida and adjacent states in the Southeast?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. The majority of our team's in Florida, but we cover, kind of the whole Gulf region. So
I want to get this program closed up so I can get you back to handling proposals and training your staff and taking care of reserve studies. So to our audience, we hope you learned some HOA insights from our discussion today that helps you bring common sense to your common areas. We look forward to having you join us for another great episode next week.
You've been listening to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. If you like the show and want to support the work that we do, you can do so in a number of ways. The most important thing that you can do is engage in the conversation. Leave a question in the comments section on our YouTube videos. You can also email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or leave us a voicemail at 805-203-3130. If you gain any insights from the show, please do us a huge favor by sharing the show with other board members that you know. You can also support us by supporting the brands that sponsor this program. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the hosts and guests, with the goal of providing general education about the community association industry. You'll want to consult licensed professionals before making any important decisions. Finally, this podcast was expertly mixed and mastered by Stokelight Video and Marketing. With Stokelight on your team, you'll reach more customers with marketing expertise that inspires action. See the show notes to connect with Stokelight.